It's Ken Kim again. This is part two of my three-part series for the 2024 election. I am going to go over the Maryland U.S. Senate race and why it wasn't wise for the GOP to spend that much money on the U.S. Senate race. To give a little background, so there's a popular Republican governor in the state of Maryland by the name of Larry Hogan who was running for U.S. Senate in the seat for 2024. He won by a margin of 1 to 200,000 votes in 2014 and 2018 during midterm years, where turnout was around 2 million registered voters. However, in presidential years, there were about 3 million registered voters the last few times in the state of Maryland. So about 1 million more people vote in the presidential election versus the midterm years. And when you look at January 2024, there was about 2,214,447 registered Democrats, about 990,000 registered Republicans, 18,000 registered Libertarians, and almost a million unaffiliated. And so we can safely assume that Maryland's registration is around 54% Democrat, 24% Republican, less than 1% Libertarian, and 22% unaffiliated. So it has about a 30% more partisan lean towards the Democrats than Republicans. And you see that at the presidential election results of 2020, 2016, and vice versa. And in modern times, most independents are usually voting straight ticket blue or red. For example, you look at the independent senators from like 2022, Kyrsten Sinema, Bernie Sanders, Angus King. I highly doubt they're voting equally Democrat or Republican. And so in the last few election cycles on the presidential level, the Democrat has won over 60% of the vote, with the GOP getting around 30%. Maryland also is a very blue state, one of the bluer ones actually in recent times. It was one of the only states that voted for Jimmy Carter against Reagan and hasn't had a Republican senator in several decades. Maryland's population also hasn't changed much in the last 5 to 10 years, so we can carry over the prior population numbers into this projection that I made for 6 months. A lot of people in the GOP were very bullish on Larry Hogan flipping the seat just because of polling, but I'm going to show more details as I go through this analysis why this wasn't a very realistic projection. And so we see here on the population census from 2020 to 2023 even, there wasn't very much change in Maryland's population. And so with that, I used that in my projection. So with political polarization, we can assume that out of that 1 million voters that only votes on presidential election day, about 65% are going to vote Democrat, while the other 35% are going to vote Republican to account for that 30% partisan lean. The average election day voter normally doesn't pay attention to politics or local politicians and will vote straight ticket for either party regardless of how well they know the candidate. For example, I even clipped here a YouTube link, not YouTube, Yahoo link, talking about like how people searched whether or not Biden dropped out of the race after they had voted in the 2024 election. And this was in states like Pennsylvania and other states. And that just gives us a testament that the average election day voter is really not paying as much attention to like the type of voter that votes in the midterms or even the off-year elections. So that's just the general expectation. And so we see here like a lot of polls 6 months out, very, very bullish on Hogan. And to be honest, I just didn't think these numbers were very realistic. And so when I made my projection, I was trying to come up with a best case scenario for Larry Hogan. Let's say, because it was going to be looking like to be a red leaning year. So let's say, based on the fact that voter registration was surging in almost every state in favor of the GOP, I was going to give Larry Hogan the best case possible scenario. But even then, though, it was kind of a stretch because the type of Republicans that do well in the state of Maryland are going to be more the center left, moderate style Republicans, which at the top of the ticket was not the case with Trump being at the top of the ticket. Larry Hogan did get a lot of Democrats to cross over for when he ran for governor in 2018 and 2022. However, some of the voters that cross over for local races may not be as keen as voting for the opposite party for federal. So, and some examples I included was 2018 with the Missouri, Indiana Senate races, where you actually had popular Democratic incumbent governors that decided to run for U.S. Senate, but then they just got absolutely crushed just because the partisan lean and people just don't vote the same way sometimes for state versus the federal level. So at the top here, so the first row column here, the 1 million to 275,000 for Hogan versus the 1 million for a Democrat. this is just a crossover what I got for the midterm 2018 result. And then, so what I did essentially is I added on a, a speculation where about 350,000 of those voters vote for Larry Hogan, while 650,000 voters vote for the Democrat, right? And so all I did was add 2018, which is one of Hogan's better results versus 2014. So again, this is the best case scenario. Hogan did better in 2018 than he did in 2014. And then I added on the election day results for 2024 voters only. And so even in the best case scenario, the Democrat is still narrowly beating Hogan. But so the generic Democrat, would get 1,652,000 votes, while Hogan would get 1,625,000, but he would still come up short. He would make it very competitive, but he still wouldn't have the raw vote numbers just because of the partisan lean. And to be honest with you, I don't expect Hogan to get this number just because I'm expecting some people that voted for him in the midterms to not vote for him in the presidential year for a federal election just because of the fact that they may not be keen on giving someone like Trump another vote in the Senate. And so when you look at the actual result, my 6 month projection, my Democrat number was almost spot on. I was only short by like 7,000, whereas Hogan, he did a few 100,000 votes worse than my best case scenario for the 6 month projection. And that was to be expected. Hogan did make this a little bit more competitive than most candidates. He did outperform Trump by over 10 points. But however, the partisan lean was going to take over, and you just had too many voters that only vote Democrat on election day. So it really wasn't that wise for the GOP to spend the money that they did on Maryland. And on the flip side, for the Democrats, I could make the same argument for Florida, where you saw the results not just in 2022, but like the way Florida has been shifting rapidly the last few election cycles under the Trump era. You could tell that it was starting to become a very unwinnable state for the Democrats. And so that's the end of my analysis on Maryland, and I'm going to go over some of the other Senate races in my next video.